He was once Hollywood's most unpredictable star, a man of mystery, intensity, and chaos. But behind Billy Bob Thornton's Oscar-winning talent and dark charm lies a string of shocking scandals and emotional wreckage. Accused of domestic abuse by his ex-wife, abandoning a lover over a single missed call, and famously wearing a vial of his new wife's blood around his neck, his personal life often overshadowed his brilliance on screen. This isn't just a story of fame and fortune, it's a journey into the twisted reality behind the spotlight, where fame doesn't always protect you from the consequences of your darkest choices. Once known as one half of Hollywood's most bizarre love story, Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie turned heads with their infamous vials of blood worn around their necks. But behind the red carpet mystique and Oscar gold was a deeply troubled man whose private life was spiraling into chaos. Thornton's legacy isn't just about cinematic brilliance, it's haunted by deep psychological wounds, personal tragedies, and a string of broken relationships that left scars he admits will never heal. "I'll be sad and melancholy about that forever," he once confessed, revealing a man unraveling from the inside. This isn't the story of a typical Hollywood downfall, it's darker, messier, and far more disturbing. With 6 marriages behind him and a daughter in serious legal and emotional trouble, Thornton's world was plagued by inner demons and mental disorders that left him isolated even while surrounded by fame. But perhaps the darkest chapter remains his time with Petra Dawn Chernia, during which he faced multiple accusations of domestic violence. Legal complaints describe a pattern of relentless abuse, from violent outbursts and intimidation to controlling every aspect of her personal life. This is the side of Billy Bob Thornton the cameras never captured, the hidden life of a man consumed by his own turmoil. Billy Bob Thornton's personal life took a dark and unsettling turn during his relationship with Petra Dawn Cherniak. According to a harrowing affidavit filed during their divorce, the abuse allegedly occurred within the walls of their Los Angeles home, a place that should have been safe, but instead became a source of trauma. The document claimed that Thornton's violent behavior caused lasting emotional damage not only to his ex-wife, but also to her 2 young children. Though Thornton denied the accusations, the divorce papers painted a grim picture of a relationship poisoned by cruelty and manipulation. The filings declared that the marriage had become, beyond repair, broken under the weight of psychological torment and emotional control. But the emotional wreckage didn't stop there. Just as the dust seemed to settle, Thornton's next relationship, with actress Laura Dern, unraveled in a way that stunned even the most scandal-hardened corners of Hollywood. The two were living together, seemingly in a committed relationship, when Thornton vanished from their shared apartment. Within days, news broke that he had married Angelina Jolie in a surprise ceremony in Las Vegas. Laura Dern was never informed. "I came home and he was married to someone else," she said, her words echoing with betrayal and disbelief. Thornton, meanwhile, refused to publicly explain the transition between the 2 relationships, offering no apology or justification. His sudden disappearance from Dern's life wasn't just an act of abandonment, it was a trigger that launched him into the most turbulent and controversial period of his life. His marriage to Angelina Jolie became infamous for its surreal intensity. They wore lockets of each other's blood, gave bizarre interviews, and displayed a level of intimacy that felt more like obsession than love. But behind that public fascination was a deeply unstable union, marred by emotional chaos and psychological strain. This chapter of Billy Bob Thornton's life revealed a disturbing pattern, a cycle of passionate highs followed by emotional fallout, of love turning into control, and of relationships collapsing under the weight of unresolved pain. As a memento of their unwavering devotion, the 2 used to wear necklaces made from each other's actual blood. During a news conference, Jolie affirmed, "It's the truth, not a symbol. A drop of blood, a symbol of dedication." Thornton allegedly created a closed-off lifestyle during their marriage, which included not having guests and not leaving the house after 6 p.m. and declining to go to Jolie-sponsored charitable functions. He acknowledged feeling unworthy of his more well-known, powerful, and worldly wife in his memoir, The Billy Bob Tapes. "I don't find it newsworthy or anything. Nothing really surprises or affects me, so it's there." Paternity disputes were also observed during this time. Maddox was adopted from Cambodia by Jolie. Thornton opposed to the adoption's legal obligation, which caused the family to become irreconcilably tense. Shortly after, the marriage ended without a formal public separation. Later, Jolie explained, "We were leading two entirely different lives. I couldn't stay in a quiet house by myself forever. Prior to Maddox, I accepted more. Since I want the best for him, I now accept nothing less than the best that is possible." Thornton's marriages were not the only personal catastrophes she experienced. Amanda Brumfield, her daughter from her first marriage, was found guilty in a case in which a child died. She was given a 20-year term after the court deemed her criminally liable for negligence that caused death. Thornton never spoke in public and declined to be interviewed by the media during her trial and sentencing. "Family is where the wound grows with age," Thornton remarked plainly after Brumfield was freed under a court order. Clinical obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is typified by an overabundance of control over everyday tasks and responses to environmental changes, was identified in Billy Bob Thornton. The illness started in maturity and lasted for a long time. Symptoms include obsessively placing items in a particular order, staying away from metallic objects like silver, and repeating a particular action before completing a crucial task. Thornton posted a post outlining common instances. He could only use objects that were positioned parallel, not slanted, and had to circle an area several times before entering it. Thornton suffered from acute anxiety episodes that resulted in social disengagement in addition to obsessive-compulsive disorder. His behavior pattern showed a widespread avoidance of external stimuli coupled with high levels of defensiveness, according to several neurologists who evaluated his condition indirectly. In order to maintain psychological stability when working on television projects, Thornton frequently asked that the lighting and sound be turned down below technical requirements or declined to attend meetings with big groups of people. Film crews attested to the fact that this was a working situation that was internally decided upon to reduce the likelihood of transient psychotic episodes. Thornton was also found to be allergic to industrial animal fats, dairy products, and wheat, which are all mainstays of the Western diet. He was compelled to follow a rigorous elimination diet for extended periods of time due to this and a neurological digestive condition. Acute myocarditis brought on by eating the wrong meals previously resulted in months of work stoppage and significant weight loss. Thornton's quality of life was directly impacted by his severe sensitivity to inflammatory drugs, which compelled him to live a very controlled lifestyle that included cooking for himself and clearing out all metal from his home. The idea of the boundaries of human tolerance to oneself was a common theme in Thornton's skepticism about reality. Thornton's screenplays and dialogue, according to internal records that were disseminated throughout the creation of his works, revealed psychological issues, a detached character, self-referential language, and a fear of conventional social expressions. Due to Thornton's unidentified personal reasons for refusing to use chemical medical procedures, this ailment was not treated with medication for many years. He decided to use limited perceptual elements, monotonous music, and repeated action to sustain his psychological condition. It was seen that Thornton's neurosis was a long-term structural disorder rather than only a transient symptom or reaction. It had an impact on his personal life, his capacity to sustain social interactions, and his entire creative process. He said, in a quote that was shared internally during a film conference in Austin, "I don't live in the same world as the rest of them, and that's not by choice, it's by nature." Billy Bob Thornton, a child in the dark, was born in a rural Arkansas community with few worldly possessions. It was determined that the early life setting did not meet the bare minimum of living conditions and lacked basic infrastructure. The family belonged to the working class, had a shaky income, and relied heavily on manual labor, small-scale farming, and food hunting. Thornton's early psychological development was directly impacted by these circumstances, which were found to generate expressions of social avoidance and an uncooperative attitude toward collective modes of living. His mother worked part-time in metaphysics, and his father, who was an education worker with a chronic illness, made up his household. 2 of the 3 youngsters were reported to have functional neurological impairments and cardiovascular issues, respectively. Prior to being able to legally become independent, Thornton had to cope with the death of his father as a child due to health issues. Due to this loss, the family had to migrate and face financial difficulties, which interfered with the local school system as a whole. One of the key elements in the development of Thornton's personal ideals has been found to be his relationship with his second brother, Jimmy Don. Jimmy Don was the only family member to show that he could compose and play music on his own. As a kind of internal tribute, Thornton took over all of Jimmy Don's remaining compositions and turned them into commercial music items after he passed away from heart problems. This has been identified as a major factor in Thornton's decision to continue making movies and music for a long period in spite of his deteriorating health and mounting workload. Due to dyslexia, Thornton faced difficulties with language and word processing in school. His formal schooling was hampered by this condition, which led to academic performance that fell short of the system's output requirements. The syndrome was only discovered when Thornton was an adult and involved in art programs because there was no psychological testing available in schools at the time. As a result, he had to study on his own and obtain resources, depending solely on memory and recording techniques rather than conventional printed texts. Thornton had ambitions of becoming a professional baseball player early in life. However, he suffered a severe mechanical injury in a tryout incident that ended his chances of ever pursuing a professional career. His strength, posture, and capacity to engage in physically demanding activities were all impacted by the event's long-term physical impacts. Thornton turned to the arts as a passive alternative when medical specialists at the time determined that continuing training would increase the likelihood of relapse. Thornton experienced a time of transition with his maternal family, who were said to uphold a rigid traditional value system, particularly when it came to morals and religious observance. He was clearly separated from his peers as a result of these limitations, which restricted his access to contemporary entertainment and the media. Many social behaviorists believe that Thornton's adolescent cultural isolation set off an isolation-related tendency that continued into adulthood. A highly protective frame of reference is produced when material poverty, emotional deprivation, and poor learning capacity are combined. In his job interviews and internal notes, Thornton makes it plain that, "I come from a place where no one can hear me." You discover that the only way to avoid being taken away is to learn to remain quiet. Rocky career. It was reported that Billy Bob Thornton took several years to get into the film business as a technical and supporting actor, with comparatively little opportunity for creative control and main roles. The shift from amateur to person behind the camera and script took place during a time when the independent market was searching for people who could develop characters with more nuance than what was considered commercial. With the psychological structure of characters based on the clinical manifestations that had grown in his own life, Thornton created a writing style based on actual observation and survival reaction. Low-budget scripting, manual staging, independent editing, and internal scene coordination were used to create the first piece with a distinct authorial stamp. Thornton had total control over the material, character design, and final message because the artistic direction was unaffected by consumer preferences. His standing as a director and actor with the ability to impact the entire production process was cemented by his professional success at the time of its release. Because of its conventional character structure based on psychological research, this work was taught in several film training colleges in addition to winning honors in the script area. Nevertheless, the tension between consumer desire and personal beliefs caused Thornton's directorial career to stall. He and the distributor got into a disagreement about the length and format of a later production effort. The owner of the commercial rights re-edited the whole movie, eliminating over one-third of Thornton's work. He believed that this direct meddling with the original work constituted a betrayal of spiritual partnership and a breach of artistic values. He halted any directorial offers after that and for a long time did not sign any new contracts pertaining to photographic direction. Characters with opposing moral philosophies and clear representations of psychological constraints were necessary for the majority of Thornton's later roles, which were performed in extremely regulated script and expressive space environments. In certain works, he portrayed archetypes that faithfully mirrored prepared personal patterns, persons with traits that were distinct, aberrant, or pushed outside the societal order. The selection of these characters reflected the deliberate restraint in the process of internal reconstruction more than the distinctive style of his acting. Outdoor of film, Thornton keeps an exercise of composing and appearing music as a way of reshaping the distance of personal manage. His very own compositions often awareness on issues of loss, social cynicism, and emotional isolation. Some of the songs are identified as being transcribed from handwritten letters or inner notes, then dealt with minimum arrangements to preserve the authentic emotional nation. In many instances, tons of the song is tied to unprocessed memories, especially those associated with family and durations of prolonged mental instability. This method creates a space for independent expression away from the scrutiny of the commercial production machine. In his later movie contracts, Thornton agreed to take part best if there had been clauses defensive his control over characters and scripts. Precise requests included the right to adjust speak on set, the proper to refuse to shoot scenes that did no longer agree to the character's behavioral pointers, and the right to consult and put up manufacturing. This made him tough to paintings with for a few manufacturers, but for Thornton, it became an inevitable outcome of his previous warfare. On the uncommon events he stated the issue, he would handiest verify, once they contact what I've performed, the rest is not mine. Thornton's film profession become not defined with the aid of the quantity of his initiatives, however by way of the exceptional of his control over his content material and the legitimacy of his non-public expression. Unlike maximum artists of his time, he selected to restrict his roles, lessen the dimensions of his productions, and prioritize intensity of content material over recognition. His script selection system became carried out inside the route of mental impact evaluation with a focal point on internal conflicts and price machine conflicts. That is what makes his roles, despite their small number, exceedingly symbolic in the modern-day film person gadget. Days after the typhoon. In recent years, Billy Bob Thornton has adjusted the entire shape of his life and expert sports to the course of control, limitation, and psychological renovation. The stableness of his private existence is installed by means of choosing a protracted-term companion well suited along with his isolated lifestyle at the same time as retaining a closed circle of relatives' life. The agency of his inner life does not encompass factors of open social conversation, does now not use public virtual platforms, and absolutely excludes private communication sports. Professionally, Thornton is presently worried in tasks that are carefully selected primarily based on professional standards, creative independence, and compatibility with the character's fee device. His latest film activities show that he continues to prioritize roles with mental depth content material that reflects internal decay and isn't always stimulated by way of market pressures. Modern contracts all include situations of closed manufacturing, constrained shooting time, and policies to shield the proper to manipulate man or woman expression. Thornton's operating mechanism is maintained with the near participation of a team of committed felony advisors and psychological help to make sure a stable production surroundings and a shape this is constant with the characters' lifestyles in situations requiring records disclosure. All content is drafted in a standardized shape without the usage of emotional language and in compliance with technical standards for personal communication safety. This approach eliminates the chance of information conflicts with the mass media machine even as proscribing the level of undesirable get right of entry to from the outdoor. Similarly to his artistic activities, Thornton maintains to function track tasks in a limited launch version focusing on a specialized audience. The primary content of these products nevertheless continues the structure of the tune in the course of abstract narrative reflecting layered emotional states and nonlinear internal picture chains. The manufacturing coordination is executed through a technical crew with a long-term collaboration duration without changing the composition even at some stage in the stages of external personnel changes. The main purpose of modern music activities is to preserve a nation of personal stability, no longer aiming at commercialization or mass popularization. Residentially and functionally, Thornton keeps a separate residence with a layout shape that serves the need for sensory isolation. All internal spaces are adjusted to standardized physical parameters of mild, and make contact with substances to keep a stable physiological state. Receiving traffic participating or collaborating in community events have to undergo a assessment manner for content and emotional compatibility. All sorts of public verbal exchange are coordinated with the aid of the executive consultant group on a one-way non-open response foundation. Thornton nonetheless keeps some of strategic expert relationships, especially with people in the film and track industries who percentage his values of minimalism, manipulate, and independence. Those relationships do no longer function on an open social network model, however rather on collaborative performance and ideological affinity. In restricted public statements, he has repeatedly asserted that his modern-day stability is the end result of doing away with all distractions, even when which means foregoing financial opportunities and brand positioning. Thornton defines his profession legacy no longer via the amount of his work or the media metrics, but by way of the shape of his content material and the depth of his revel in. He sees professionally as success tasks as anchors of his values, no longer as cumulative achievements. This angle shapes his technique to roles, his choice of discussion, and his determination of his paintings as message. His self-positioning device focuses no longer on social reputation, but at the ability to preserve private integrity in surroundings that can erode notion. Billy Bob Thornton's existence turned into not a sequence of accolades, but an adventure through trauma to preserve his identification in a world that demanded trade. From his quiet turmoil to his unresolved courting wounds, from his reputedly exquisite profession to his preference to live in isolation, he never shied far from his darkish facet. And possibly that is what he has remembered for a real man residing a real life and taking obligation for each the light and the darkish in his existence. In case you discover this adventure concept provoking, please proportion the video. Like to help the channel, enroll and not miss the subsequent memories and leave a comment underneath to discuss. We are always prepared to pay attention. Thanks for watching till the cease.